Welcome to everyone who has joined us in this breakout session. My name is Evelyne Paradis. I'm the director of ILGA Europe, which is a European LGBTI association. And I'm here with my colleague, Anna.
Hi, I'm a partnerships manager at ILGA Europe. So I take the lead on our private sector partnerships and more widely lead our work on workplace diversity and inclusion issues.
And so we're here today. We were invited and very happy to be here. We've been working and engaging with Workplace Pride's team for quite some years now. And to go back to some of the remarks that Mark Emden made at the beginning, I think for us it felt very important to contribute to the event today. We couldn't agree more about the sense that we are at an incredible period of change, where many things are still up in the air and to be defined. And in that sense, coming together and widening partnerships and widening alliances feels more important than ever. So continuing to deepen the connections between the LGBTI movement and civil society and private sector and businesses is for us of crucial importance at the moment. So what we wanted to do today and what we wanted to offer is a short glimpse into what the current situation is for LGBTI people and the state of the work on LGBTI equality in Europe at this particular moment in time and history, but also to have a free flow conversation as much as it is possible on a digital platform like this one, to get a sense from you who work in private sector about what the conversation is within your own organizations and companies in the COVID time, to see how we can come together and towards building new partnership. Maybe just a very few words about ILGA Europe for those of you who are not familiar with the organization. So we are a European network of 600 plus LGBTI organizations and groups. I say European, but I should say actually Europe and Central Asia are the geographical mandate of ILGA Europe. Covers 54 countries, so from Iceland all the way to Central Asia. We do a range of things, from direct advocacy and policy work with institutions in Europe, mostly the European Union and the Council of Europe. We do capacity building, direct capacity building and support for LGBTI organizations and activists across the region, including some grant making, quite a bit actually of grant making. So direct funding for these organizations. We do litigation with European courts, and all of this culminates every year at our annual conference, which is the largest conference of LGBTI activists every year. Although this year, just like for Workplace Pride, we're looking at an online version of that conference. So I'll start with a brief, as I say, brief overview of where we're at to give you a sense of what the state of play is. I hope you all see the one slide that we have. So many of you may be, or some of you may be familiar with this map that you see appearing. It is a map that ILGA Europe publishes every year. It's a Rainbow Europe map. And the map is a tool that captures basically the state of play when it comes to laws and policies in Europe on a range of criterias that we consider to be important cornerstones to LGBTI equality. So when we launch this map every year around May 17th, the day against homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia, it's our moment to take stock of what the situation is in Europe when it comes to the political and legal landscape for LGBTI people. And this year, so a month ago when we launched the map, we came with a very clear and rather dramatic message, which is that it is a very pivotal moment for LGBTI people in Europe, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I can't go into the details of all of the elements of the map because that would take in itself more than an hour. But just to give some of the highlights as to why we were saying and why we're still saying this is a very pivotal moment. So the map is, we've been publishing the map for 10 years now. And so we're able to monitor progression. And I think what we're able to actually say at this time is that whilst there's an overall tendency to think that progress has been made, and progress has been made in Europe, there's been a very, very clear stagnation and complacency that has been settling in the region for a number of years now. And that was very clear this year with our map, where 49% of the countries, in 49% of the countries, there was absolutely no positive change to report on. Nothing was done. So that's half of the countries that are on our map where nothing has been done. So the clear sign that things are stagnating, that governments are no longer taking any kind of measures to increase the protection for LGBTI people. We have also many legislative processes in the region that have been stalled. I guess one very well-known piece of legislation that has been stalled would be marriage equality in Czech Republic. You might have heard that this has been in the works for some time and it's not going anywhere. So that's one of the many examples. And so there is, on one hand, a great stagnation, and on the other hand, the map shows that there is complacency in the sense that things are no longer happening. We've seen this, for instance, that a number of equality measures like equality plans or LGBTI action plans in different countries have not been renewed. And we don't necessarily say that it's in some cases, it's not necessarily that things are no longer felt to be important. It's just that people are no longer paying attention to the importance of having an LGBTI action plan. So that was the case this year in France, in Belgium, and in Finland. So we don't necessarily take it that those governments are against LGBTI equality, but they're no longer paying enough attention to the importance of keeping the momentum going. So that's one piece of the story. The other piece of the story is that for the second year in a row, countries are actually losing points. They're moving backwards, physically moving backwards. And the most clear examples of that are Poland and Hungary, which have been in the news. So you've probably been following those situations. But already before the developments that have been in the news recently, whether it's the bill in Hungary that is now explicitly banning legal gender recognition, or some of the incredibly worrying statements made by the president in Poland. So even before those recent developments, both countries in the past year have lost points on our map because of regressions on political and civil rights, organizations being less secure, increase in hate crimes, existing policies that were protecting trans rights or LGBT rights that are starting to be eroded. So there's a really marked track of moving backwards. So there are a few bits of good news, of course, in all of this. Where progress continues to be made tends to be mostly when it comes to trans rights specifically and intersex rights. So more and more governments are adopting very explicit measures to protect not only trans rights, but the rights of intersex people. So that's the good news story of our map. But even that good news, which used to be a very, very good news in the past, is now already tainted and more nuanced, because we're also seeing an increase in the backlash on trans rights. Some of you might be following the conversations in the UK around trans rights, which is an incredibly polarized discussion, which is creating a whole lot of, fueling a lot of hatred and toxicity in in the society more widely, which is having a very very negative impact for trans people themselves. Never mind that the current legislation is being stalled. It was just announced just last week that the proposed reform to the Legal Gender Recognition Act is being withdrawn. So there's all of these tendencies that are, are incredibly worrying from us. And I'll add 2 points, which is this year when we launched our map in the middle of May, it was also, we did it in conjunction with the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency, the FRA, which was launching the results of its second survey on LGBTI experiences. So the Fundamental Rights Agency carried out a survey, the second edition to a survey they first did in 2012, which is the largest survey done in the region. It included 140,000 respondents, and that survey actually showed that things haven't progressed overall when it comes to the lived experience of LGBTI people in 7 years. Actually, the number of people who reported having experienced discrimination in the previous year was slightly higher. It was 40 than 7 years ago. So this survey showed that 43% of people reported experiencing discrimination the previous year, whereas 7 years ago was 37%. So of course that's an average for the European Union, and there are very important differences between different countries. But the bottom line is there's been very little progress in the actual lived reality of people in 7 years, contrary to, I guess, an assumption that many of us would have, that things are going in the right direction, which might be true in some countries, but there's still so much work to be done. And I'll add that all of the data that I'm presenting, whether it's from the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency survey or from our Rainbow Map, this is all data that was done pre-pandemic. And what we've been documenting along with our LGBTI organizations at national level for the past 3 months is the impact of the pandemic, which happens at many different levels for the LGBTI community. So to name it very quickly, there's a clear impact on increased mental health issues, especially for people who found themselves in family surroundings which were homophobic, transphobic, not welcoming. There's increasing documenting of family abuse, big issues in terms of accessing treatment, especially for trans people, delayed surgeries, access to hormones, access to HIV/AIDS treatments, impact on the prevention of HIV, issues around family recognitions, especially for people who found themselves cross-border in very difficult situations where the borders have been closed and where there's lack of family recognitions. That has added to the impact for people. And never mind the economic impact. Again, the Fundamental Rights Agency was already reporting pre-COVID that over a third of the LGBTI respondents indicated having difficulty making ends meet. And that's before the economic crisis started to hit the community. All of this in a context where the political landscape hasn't been extraordinarily positive in many countries, but there is a marked increase of hate speech by politicians and religious leaders, including documenting in quite a number of countries the use of increased scapegoating of LGBTI people and linking LGBTI communities to the start of blaming basically the pandemic on LGBTI communities. So that is the context in which we're operating, which is which is not an extraordinarily positive picture at the moment. But For us at ILGA Europe, what the bottom line is that this is the moment also to act. The work is not done, far from it, but it's also, as was said by Mark at the beginning, this is a moment to reinvent a lot. We are indeed seeing a lot more solidarity within, across communities, across movements. There is no doubt that the solidarity that exists already within LGBTI communities has only been increased and more visible. So there's, we believe at ILGA Europe, a moment of opportunities, incredible opportunities to seize, because there is a lot of, there's a lot of resilience. There's already a lot of basis on which to create this work. And so that's the conversation we want to bring, that there's an incredible need, but there's also incredible room to do something about it at the moment. And so I will end that there and turn to my colleague and hand over to my colleague Anna to turn this into a what do we do now?
Great, thank you. Were there any questions before we move on? I see there was one question about what we as individuals or local communities can do to improve the situation in countries where the situation is worsening. I think this is partly what we will discuss in the next part.
France.
There was also a question about why France is lower than Montenegro. And concern about the situation in Poland and whether there is any ongoing business coalitions there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can take the question on France. I think the Rainbow Europe criteria are quite broad. So there's a range of items that we look at. So I saw that the comment was specifically looking at there is marriage equality in France and there's no partnership recognition in Montenegro. I think one thing that is important to look at is that yes, the rainbow map looks at what exists in terms of legislation and laws where it comes to protection against discrimination, family rights, protection against violence, legal gender recognition, and fundamental freedoms, and so on. So it's on the range of things, and so marriage equality in that sense is one important piece. It's incredibly symbolically important, but in order to assess the whole package, we look at so many different legislations. And one thing that is particular to countries in the Western Balkans is that there has been quite a lot of work done when it comes to improving legislation because of the desire to join the European Union. So whereas it's been harder to make the case in some of the European Union countries to continue to adopt strong legislative measures. So that's where we have some bits of interesting nuancing between non-EU countries and EU countries that might surprise some people, but the pressure of the European Union has meant that many of these countries, like Montenegro, have adopted very strong laws when it comes to protection against discrimination, against hate crimes, and also increasingly for trans and intersex people. So they might not have partnership yet, but they have adopted quite a number of other measures that we consider to be very important, which is not, of course, to say that the lived reality in Montenegro is better than it is in France. So that's not what we're saying. We're just saying comparing the policies and legislations.
Thanks. There are quite a few questions on what the business community can do and D&I practices. So I think at this point we'll move on to that topic. So Evelyne has provided the context of where we are in terms of LGBTI rights in the region, and we'd really like to start a discussion on on where the business community is, what the impact of the COVID-19 crisis has been for you, what has been the impact on engagement and support for LGBTI equality, both internally and outside the walls of your companies, and how then we can go forward and build and improve alliances to advance the situation and counter some of the rollback that we've talked about. So we'd like to start a discussion. We're going to try and use the chat box. I know you can't use your mics or cameras, but let's see whether we can make this work. So we'd really like you to use the chat box function to tell us what's coming up for you in terms of your work internally on LGBTI equality and inclusion as a result of the COVID-19 impact crisis. So have you seen a tendency to deprioritize equality and inclusion work? Is the work continuing? Is it changing direction? Are there new challenges or opportunities coming up? We have one comment here saying that we've moved to virtual meetings and set up check-ins with our ERG members. And it's still high on the agenda, so far no deprioritization. So that's very good to hear, and I think it reflects the work of some of our member organizations as well, who have taken activities online and have been doing community engagement online. Another comment here saying that there's a strong D&I focus on people of color. Mm-hmm. And the role of allies have become more important in that space. Mm-hmm.
I have to say it's great to read those comments that around equality and diversity and inclusion not being deprioritized, because that is one of the worries from the perspective of ILGA Europe in terms of how we keep equality high on the agenda. I will say that one of the pieces that ILGA Europe has been working very, very hard on from a Brussels-based European Union perspective over the past 3 months was to engage with the European Commission and EU commissioners to make sure that one thing that they had put on their work program for this year, which was the launch of the first EU LGBTI equality strategy, that it would not get dropped from the European Commission's work program. And so that was successful, but that was also a piece of work. And we're already seeing how we need to keep the momentum to make sure that LGBTI equality, but other forms of equality policies remain top of the agenda and are not seen as items that you deprioritize in the context of, health and economic crisis. So important to read that some of your companies are keeping that momentum.
Exactly. And just summarizing quite a few comments here about a shift towards well-being and care. And even increased activities with LGBTI networks because of going online and virtual. That's really, really good to hear. So then thinking about not only kind of engaging with LGBTI inclusion and diversity inside your company, but looking kind of outside the walls of your company, an engagement with LGBTI activists, for example, Pride. Has the crisis had any impact on that engagement? Or has it shifted, for example? I know many companies sponsor prides, attend prides visibly, and support prides, for example. So we assume that there's been a shift there, but we'd be really interested to hear kind of how you continue to engage with LGBTI advocates and organizations.
So as some of you reflect on the question that Anna just posed, which is if there's how it might have impacted how you how your companies might engage with events like Prides, which would normally happen at this moment of the year, I see many of you mentioning the like how you've worked internally on mental health and also on support for your employees in general, I assume, but also LGBTI employees. And to go back to the question of what can be done and what you can do as companies, I think we're clearly all facing the same issues of how we maintain mental health, how we organize ourselves. And perhaps some of your companies, like you might have more resources to think that through and have access to more tools on how to do this compared to LGBTI groups who are having to do many things all at once. So where you have contacts with LGBTI groups in your respective countries, that might be something you want to reach out and offer to say, look, we've developed this material, we've developed these tools, we've developed these practices. We might have it, if any of our advice could be of use to you, we're happy to share what has been developed in our own companies and our organization, because that's definitely a question we get asked a lot. Many LGBTI groups and organizations at the moment have had to reinvent themselves, just like pretty much everybody else in the world. But they're having to reinvent themselves very quickly on a range of levels. And not everyone has the ability or the space to think everything through. So what you can, that is very concretely one thing you can offer in the immediate future, I would say.
Very interesting that someone has commented here that that paradoxically they've got more executive airtime. So I think because of, potentially because of we're traveling less, we actually have more time with each other and more time for conversations. So it's a good moment to leverage those opportunities.
Great.
Okay. So a comment here from Shell, who have increased consistency and initiated group-wide initiatives and not just country-based ones. And IBM is continuing, even increasing financial support and sponsorships.
So again, I'll just say I'm actually very I'm very positively I'm happy to read all of these comments. And going forward, it's going to be incredibly important to have those messages coming beyond the walls of your companies, because continuing to make the case for diversity, inclusion, equality, especially in a time of economic downturn, is going to be absolutely crucial to sustain the work at the political level. So the more if you have airtime and more airtime with your executives, I would say that's a message to bring is to say, great that we're doing this internally, and how can we be part of a public conversation about the importance of continuing that work. I can tell you we need governments in Europe to hear that message coming from the business community. We are telling them about the needs of people, but if you can make sure that your businesses contribute to sending that message also from a business economic perspective, that is a way forward.
A comment here from Vodafone saying that Vodafone is a supporting organization of Prague Pride, which isn't happening without the physical Pride parade, but Vodafone is continuing the support. And that's a really good example, I think, of finding creative and innovative ways, alternative ways of continuing the support, ongoing support for LGBTI groups is so vital.
Yes. There's a question that says, would it be possible for you to work with Workplace Pride on how we can take this forward together? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, that's I think the intention. That's where the conversation is going, and that's what we were wanting to be part of the conversation of the event today. Yeah, simple answer is yes. We're definitely wanting to
I think to to reflect again what Mark was saying earlier, that this is really a moment to act and reinvent ourselves and our way of working in alliances, and it seems like a key moment for businesses to support advocacy efforts, and also to come together and do that where it can really make a difference at the moment.
Yeah.
So definitely, we want to be part of taking this work forward.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question around constitutional courts and the courts. There's yes, there's actually a lot of work happening in terms of litigation at European level. I can't speak specifically for Poland. I know the case of Hungary with the ban on legal gender recognition. There are already a number of conversations and discussions around where that could be taken in terms of litigation. So that is a very active area indeed that ILGA Europe is part of, along with other organizations. And it connects to the case, like there's a question that says IKEA case in Poland. I'll have to admit I'm not familiar enough with the legal case in Poland, the IKEA legal case in Poland. A person got fired. Yeah, well, I would expect that it's the Polish organizations are on it. We can explore that. But I think on a connected point that I wanted to make as well, because I've been talking a lot about making the case from businesses about the importance of diversity and equality, but also thinking of those countries where things are going in a definite wrong direction. There was already a few conversations around Hungary a few months, well, over a month ago, where that would have been a case where in the future we would hope that we have more mobilization and we're better equipped to work with the private sector. Hungary would be a country where at the moment, in all honesty, the leverage that we can have from the European Union is not an obvious one. It's not clear that the Orban government is actually going to be listening to what they hear and they're told by the European Union. However, the message coming from the business community might have helped. And so we're looking into the future, into how we can be better coordinated and figure out that we have strong coalitions to act in cases similar to Hungary. I saw much earlier in the thread, there was a question around a country like Turkey and what to do in a country like Turkey. So those are things to explore, how if businesses come not as single businesses, we understand that it might be hard and difficult for one single company to stand out and to take a stand. But if there's a collective of companies with a similar message, that is something that is definitely worth exploring. We know it's been working in other parts of the world before. So definitely something, one of the questions for us to work on with Workplace Pride. There's a whole conversation around the IKEA manager in Poland, which I'll admit I saw in passing and didn't really have time to become familiar with. So, IKEA manager charged for firing worker over anti-gay comment. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to what Evelyne was just saying about the importance of coalitions of businesses, that it's what we want to do is work form alliances between civil society and the business community as well, in places where it can make a difference. At the moment, there was a question earlier about Poland. And I think that's another good example of where this can make a difference.
Okay, so sorry, I'm getting it. So the ministry is acting against IKEA. Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, I'll just say thank you for bringing this to our attention, because it might be something we're able to relay back also from the European Union level. And as I said, I will admit having seen the headline, but having not had time to go into the details. So it's good to be aware of it, and we'll see how we can bring it in some elements of conversations. So Australia. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the comment is about businesses speaking out in support of marriage equality and the impact that has made. And I think there are examples in other countries as well, like Ireland, where that has made a big impact.
Mm-hmm. So maybe as I've been definitely saying a lot of things about our wishes and where we would like to get into a next step in terms of working with the private sector and businesses, and taking it to another level. It would be interesting to get your reactions to how realistic all of this is, what some of the challenges might be in working together, in getting your companies to take that extra public step, if challenges are there, so that we think strategically about how we build those partnerships and coalition. So how realistic, I guess the question is, like, how realistic is it when I say, could your companies be more public about the importance of continuing with of prioritizing equality, diversity, and inclusion to be part of the public discussion at the moment and the political discussion? How realistic is that it will happen? And it's more than fine if you say you're dreaming, Evelyne. At least we know where to stand, where we stand.
Yeah, there's a point here about that. Exactly. Yes, they can be effective, but we need a critical mass.
Exactly. Okay.
And I think where it has been effective, it has been a coalition of companies, whether it's speaking up, taking a stand on marriage equality in Australia against transgender bathroom bans in the US, having that a big coalition of companies taking a stand together is very effective.
Yeah.
And yeah, an example here of Coca-Cola having ads in Budapest. And again, I think if there had been a broader coalition of companies supporting each other in taking a stand, that can be more effective.
Yeah, and I'll go back to, I mean, clearly this is a first conversation and it's online. It's very interesting for all of us to do that. But I'll go back to my main points around the state of play in Europe, which is at best we're stagnating and at worst we're actually regressing. And so this is where we clearly can no longer just be talking between civil society and governments and public institutions. We've known this for a long time, but in order to really progress the change, we need to have a critical mass, to use that expression. We need to have a critical mass of also the private sector saying we need to move forward. We need to continue to move forward, and it's even more important knowing that the next year and coming couple of years are going to be hard, because we're going to be in a challenging, difficult economic situation in Europe, but globally.
A very good comment here on backlash. I think we try and we can continue to try harder, but there has recently been backlash with pinkwashing, which had some people turn cold. So that's a good point about the risks involved, which is something to be aware of. But I think in many contexts, the advocacy work and standing side by side with civil society is not always public facing. It can be take different forms. And it's always important to work side by side with local groups to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it is an important point to emphasize. We're more than aware of the backlash. But the experience that we have is that where local groups, where LGBTI groups, whether they're local, national, or European groups, are involved, the backlash risks are always significantly decreased, because when there's good cooperation and both civil society and LGBTI organization understand where companies are going and what they want, it's a lot easier to work together and not get into the critical mode. We adjust the message and we adjust the intention and the action. And that's been, I think, overall successful, right, Anna?
Yeah, definitely.
So another reason to work together.
Yeah. And just, I think we have to, in a few minutes, we'll have to close. But just to raise another point made here, that an internal problem can be the idea that it's not a problem anymore. For example, you have gay marriage. Why do you need to continue to talk about it? So it's about being able to make the case internally of why this is important, and why there are places where a difference really can be made.
Which is where, I mean, we don't do this. I don't have a very negative message at the moment, because it pleases me to do so. But I actually, we've grown to the point where this is the reality, that I think the case is very clear, that the problems are still there, that wherever marriage equality has been adopted, it's still not the panacea. It was one important step, but the issues are very clear. So by all means, contact us, because I think between ILGA Europe and all of our partners, there's quite a lot of argument to show to people just how much more work is needed.
So before we close, thanks a lot for all of your comments. There were a lot, and it's really good to hear that LGBTI diversity and inclusion work is continuing and even strengthening and taking new forms. And it's also really great to hear the enthusiasm for taking this work forward with ILGA Europe. And finding ways to support and advance equality in the region.
Yeah, and thank you very much for engaging with us in that way. Anna and I were a little bit nervous about how this was all going to go as an online conversation, but it's turned out great. So thank you very much for the engagement. And I guess now it's our job to tell you just to redirect you to going back to the lobby. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.